Good afternoon. I'm one of Helen Goodman's constituents. I live in Barnard Castle, where I'm the branch chair of Teesdale Labour Party. I'm also a town councillor in Barnard Castle, although I'm not speaking formally on their behalf because there wasn't time to endorse me to do that. Various people in our constituency started a petition less than a week ago asking that we don't have closures of A&E at Darlington Memorial Hospital. Within a few days we got 6,672 signatures. There'll be a lot more if we let that petition run a little longer. It's already been mentioned that until 2009 there was A&E in Bishop Auckland, and that we were promised that on the closure of that we'd be okay because everybody can go to Darlington. And if that's no longer going to be the case, like many other people who are speaking today, I've got a little table of distances that I've calculated, and I pretty much concur with what's already been said. What I've also done is found on the internet a paper by Nichols et al., which was in the Journal of Emergency Medicine in September 2007, called The Relationship Between Distance to Hospital and Patient Mortality in Emergencies, an Observational Study. So if you calculate the extra kilometres, they say for every extra 10 kilometres that somebody has to travel in an emergency, on average, we have 1% extra mortality. So 1 out of 100 people making that extra journey will die on the way. So that means that in Bishop Auckland, if we end up having to go to Middlesbrough instead of Darlington, there's an extra 2.4% mortality. Barnard Castle, an extra 3%. Middleton and Teesdale, an extra 3.2%. When I asked the NHS Better Health people about that, they told me that that was old data and it's no longer the case and we could discount it. But they've never shown me any more recent data that would tell me why we can discount that paper and what the figures would be now. And I think one of the things I would say, and again I agree with many of the previous speakers, is that some of us will understand numbers if you show them to us. And we're not seeing enough data, we're not seeing enough evidence for these profound changes that are going to be made. So at the NHS Better Health meetings, which I've been to several now, are pretty much conducted as Professor Murphy recently described the Sedgefield Racecourse meeting, that we gather into workshops and we're asked to address particular questions. I think it's a very useful way of deflecting us from the questions we really want to ask. So they have majored on the idea that cardiovascular and trauma patients need to be treated in specialist centres where a critical mass of staff can maintain their skills. We understand that. Without seeing any of the data, we've kind of gone along with that. I still would like to see the evidence that shows how much better patients do in those specialist centres. It would put my mind at rest. So we're told that the benefits of going to these specialist centres outweighs the extra time spent in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. However, I asked NHS Better Health in an email at the end of last year what proportion of emergency journeys are not cardiovascular, are not trauma cases, and the answer came back 94%. So if Darlington A&E closes, the vast majority of patients making the extra journeys to Middlesbrough or Stockton will not see the extra benefit of being treated in a specialist centre. So what is the impact on them? So the conditions we're talking about, just to be clear for those 94% are, and this is not an exhaustive list, acute asthma, acute pelvic pain, adrenal crisis, anaphylactic shock, appendicitis, attempted suicide, bowel obstruction, COPD, dehydration, diabetic coma, drowning, preeclampsia, ectopic pregnancy, electric shock, fetal distress, fulminant colitis, heat stroke, hypothermia, meningitis, poisoning, renal failure, ruptured spleen, seizures, convulsions, sepsis, smoke inhalation and threatened miscarriage. Now, there's probably a lot more things that would take you to hospital on a red code in an ambulance, but those are just some of the ones that are not going to be improved by the proposals that are being given to us. So I want to know, where are those people going to be treated, the 94% of emergency journeys that are not benefiting from a specialist centre? Is time not of the essence for them? If it isn't, why isn't it? The Trust needs to demonstrate why it believes that clinical outcomes will not be adversely affected by these plans. So far, we've seen no evidence that that's the case. There's also a really interesting site on the internet called Quality Watch, and there's a paper in there based on, by a guy called Roberts in February 2014, focus on distance from home to emergency care. The mean distance nationally is 7.2 kilometres. The furthest that they could detect in their survey 2 years ago was in Eden in Cumbria, 34 kilometres. Only 3% of the patients in the study lived further than 30 kilometres from their emergency centre. The proposals that are being given to us now, if people have to go to Stockton and Middlesbrough, is that nobody in Bishop Auckland, Barnard Castle, Middleton and Teesdale would get to hospital in the right amount of time, because they all live further than 34 kilometres. So we are seeing an acceptance that these distances don't matter and that they're being eroded, and the sense of urgency about getting people to hospital is ebbing away. I should also, I recognise also that the time taken for ambulances to get to us in southwest Durham has also been mentioned, and that's also a huge issue. And the question was asked, how long does it take for somebody to get to James Cook by bus? I've also worked that out. If you live in Barnard Castle, there's 2 buses you have to take. You have to change in Darlington. The total journey time, bus stop to bus stop, is 2 3/4 hours, which doesn't seem to me to be very acceptable for maybe an elderly person visiting a relative. So if you haven't got a car, this is by no means an improvement in service for anxious relatives and for patients who will be helped to get better by the presence and the visits of their relatives. So just to finish, I would say I don't think it is reasonable that people should have to travel 70 kilometres or 44 miles to A&E in fog and snow and darkness. It's especially galling to me that coming from Teesdale, they would have to pass within a few hundred yards of Darlington Memorial Hospital to make that journey on to James Cook. What difference is that going to make to their lives and their future health? I think Darlington A&E has to stay because rural lives matter as much as urban lives matter. This is not about sustaining the NHS, it's eroding it. So I would request that we need to see evidence before we accept any of the statements made in this STP process, and that we assure ourselves that clinical outcomes are not going to be adversely affected. Thank you.